A beautiful and loving 21-year-old girl would leave her home to go to a friend's house. Unfortunately, she would never be heard from again. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. Keeshae Jacobs was a 21-year-old girl living with her mother, Toni, in Richmond, Virginia. Keeshae's mother, Toni Jacobs, would describe her daughter as somebody who loved to be hugged. She would say, she used to hug all the time. For no reason. She'd say, Mom, I need a hug. And I'd be like, Keeshae, I just gave you a hug 5 minutes ago. Toni would say that her and her daughter loved scary movies, and they would get in bed and they'd get the blanket and turn the lights down and pretend they were in the movie theater. Not only was Keeshae loving and caring and sweet, but she seemed incredibly responsible as well. She was always in contact with her mother and brother and never left them to wonder where she was. So when this beautiful, loving, young 21-year-old girl told her mother that she was going to a friend's house one evening in September, Toni didn't worry. On Monday, September 26, 2016, Keeshae was getting ready to go to a friend's home. Although that evening in the Jacobs home seemed pretty standard for the family, one thing stood out. Keeshae had had an argument with her boyfriend, and she was pretty upset about it. But her mother, Toni, and her brother would sit down and talk to her about it. I just want to pause and say that Keeshae's family, her mother and her brother, they had this tight little bond, and they seemed like a really well-rounded, sweet, always there for each other type of family. After Keeshae chatted with her mother and brother and they seemed to calm her down and make her feel better, she told them that she was heading out to a friend's home. She said, I love you, I'll be back tomorrow. And Toni said, okay, that's fine, but make sure you let me know when you get there safely. Although Toni said that, I firmly believe that she knew her daughter would have texted her the moment she got safely to her friend's home. As I mentioned, Keeshae was incredibly responsible and she was very close to her family and she loved them dearly. She wouldn't want them to worry about her. Around 11 o'clock that evening, Toni was getting ready for bed. She jumped in the shower. She was getting her work things ready so she could head to work in the morning. And when she got out of the shower, she did have a text message from her daughter. And Toni just replied back, be careful, stay safe, I love you, I'll see you tomorrow. Keeshae would text back, I love you too. Before leaving that night, she did tell her 25-year-old brother, Davon, that she'd be back home early to make him pancakes. Unfortunately, the next morning, both her brother Davon and her mother Toni woke up, but there was no smell of pancakes. As Toni was getting ready for work, she didn't fret too much over it. She just figured that maybe her daughter was running late and hadn't gotten up yet, so she headed to work. At around lunchtime, Toni is on her break and she realizes her daughter still hasn't texted or called her. And suddenly, she knows something is wrong. It's unlike Keeshae to go that long without talking to her mother. So of course, she pulls out her phone and she starts texting and calling her daughter, but she's getting no response. At this point, Toni has become increasingly distraught. She knows her daughter and she knows that she would never be out of contact for long periods of time. Even if her daughter's phone was broken, she would use somebody else's phone to get in contact with her mother so that her mother didn't worry about her. Toni Jacobs would go on to say, I just kept calling her phone. I texted her brother and he was like, no, I ain't heard from her mom. She's okay, she maybe just hung out with her friends or whatever. I tried to explain to people that even though, like, Keeshae's phone was broke one time, she would use somebody else's phone to let me know that she's okay or what's going on. Or she'll log into Facebook and message me on Facebook and let me know. Hey mom, my phone broke. I'm still with so-and-so. I'll give you a call, or can you come pick me up when you get off of work? So she wasn't getting any response. So by the time Toni got off of work, she knew she had to do something. So when Toni got off of work, she began to call all of Keeshae's friends that she knew. And they, of course, were like, hey, we'll help. We're going to call around. We'll see if anybody knows where she is. So by this point, it's Tuesday, and she still hasn't heard anything from her daughter. Keeshae's friends aren't coming up with anything, although they're calling around, looking for her. And unfortunately, Toni realizes that something is seriously amiss here. Although Toni was concerned about the whereabouts of her daughter, she felt that they lived in a relatively safe area, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had a very close connection to Keeshae. She would say that when they told me it was a girl, I really wanted a boy. I had the impression that girls was gonna give you a lot of hell. I'm sorry, so I was scared. But once I came to terms I was having a girl, she's gonna be unique. It's just, I don't know. It's just that's what popped into my head for her. She's my unique baby. Keeshae is my baby. As much as she wants to act like she was grown, she still acted like a baby. I had 2 kids, but you would have thought that she was the oldest because she always acted like she ran stuff. But she was a very sweet and loving person. Like Keeshae loved to give hugs, and I used to tell people all the time she can make you feel so special and so loved because she hugged you so much. I used to have to tell her, hey, can I put some of those on layaway for later? Because you overwhelm me with the love for today. Yes, she was that homebody. She was very family oriented. She liked to be around family a lot and treasured when we had spent time together. She used to be my little sidekick most of the time. Tony would say that basically the two did everything together. Where Tony went, Keeshae went with her. If she was going to a friend's home to have dinner, her daughter was right by her side. And not only was Keeshae incredibly close with her mother, Tony, but she also had an incredibly close bond to her older brother. Tony would say that after her son was released from jail, he was incarcerated for a short amount of time, Keeshae was just so excited to have him home. She wanted to take care of him, to protect him, and make sure that he never got into any trouble again. She would say that she never really had to worry about her daughter getting in trouble. She wasn't the type to go out to clubs and get dressed up and spend hours out until the wee hours of the morning drinking and hanging out with friends. She liked to lounge around in her basketball shorts and t-shirts and relax and be close to home. And although Tony trusted her daughter completely, she was worried about the people in Keeshae's life. Tony would go on to say, I just used to talk to her and be like, hey, just be cautious. Everybody that says they're your friend is not your friend. A real friend would try to make sure you stay on the positive end, up and up. So she may have 1 or 2 that were okay, and then she had some that was questionable. Tony would say that on the night her daughter left their house, there was one person in particular that Tony had warned her daughter about. She just had this incredibly bad feeling about one of the women that Keeshae had been hanging out with. Tony would say, it was just something about the girl. I can't even put my finger on it, but I didn't think she was a good friend to Keeshae. And that girl that Tony mentioned is one of the last people to have been seen with Keeshae. Tony would say, the last night that I saw Keeshae, one of her other best friends picked her up, which I trust Keeshae with him 100%. But that female, no, I did not care for her. So that Monday passes, and although Tony is just incredibly worried, she knows that she needs to get some sleep and wake up tomorrow and hope that her daughter is safe. She wakes up the next day after kind of this turbulent night. She's not sleeping well. She's tossing and turning. There's just no way she can get a restful sleep when she's so worried about her child being out there and not having a way to contact her. So the next morning, Tony wakes up, she gets dressed, and immediately she starts going door to door and knocking and asking people if they've seen her daughter. So as she's doing this, nobody really has any answers for her. They don't know what happened to Keeshae. They haven't seen her. And of course, this is only making Tony more worried. And Tony's sister says, hey, we need to file a missing persons report. So she goes to the Richmond Police Department and she realizes that unfortunately it was closed by that point. It was later in the evening now, and apparently they closed for the evening. So Tony realizes, I can't get into the police station, and my only other option here is to call 911. And so she calls 911, and the police arrive at her door, and she tells them what's happened. And the police officers basically say, she's 21, maybe she doesn't want to be found by you. She's 21, she's an adult, there's really not much we can do for you. And Tony, at this point, she's crying, she's sobbing, and she's like, please look at these text messages. My daughter and I text all day, every day. You don't understand, something is wrong. The police basically said, a detective will be in touch with you tomorrow. By this point, Tony had been able to kind of put some things together in regards to what her daughter was doing that night that she left the home. She learned that Keeshae's best friend, that man that Tony trusted 100% with her daughter, had dropped Keeshae and that other girl that she didn't like and just had this really bad feeling about. He dropped both of them off at somebody's house. And he knew where the house was, so Tony got the address, and the very next day, she went to that home. She arrives to this 2-story red brick row house, and she's cautiously going through the gate, and she walks up on the porch, and she knocks on the door, and she waits a moment. And I'm sure by this point she was incredibly nervous. She doesn't know what she's going to find on the other side of that door, or maybe she's going to find her daughter and she's really excited to get her home and figure out what is going on. But she's waiting, and then the door swings open. This man opens the door and he said his name is Otis. And this man, Otis, tells Tony that he has no idea what happened to Keeshae or where she is. But he would say something incredibly strange. He would tell Tony that the last time he saw Keeshae was around 5 p.m. that Monday evening. And of course, Tony's looking at this man and she knows he's lying. Keeshae wasn't there at his home at 5 p.m. that Monday. She was at home with her mother and brother. So instantly, I'm sure Tony has this gut feeling like he knows more than he's leading on to. Why is he lying about seeing her when she was at home? And she tells this man, Keeshae wasn't here at 5 p.m. She was with me. And then he starts to change his story. He said, oh, maybe it's 6 o'clock or 6:30. No, maybe it was 7 o'clock. And she's standing there listening to him and she's like, this isn't right. So she calls the police right then and there. Police would arrive pretty quickly at the scene. 4 officers pulled up. They talked to this man and he let them inside his home. They walked around, they checked things out quickly, and they came out and said, Keeshae isn't here. Unfortunately, Tony couldn't do anything else. Police came. This man willingly let them into his home to walk around and check things, and then they didn't find anything. So there wasn't much else they could do about this. But Tony had a bad feeling. She knew that something was wrong. And she knew that this man, Otis, knew more than he was letting on to. So Tony jumps into gear and she just starts printing missing person flyers, and her family and friends, they're plastering them all over the neighborhood in hopes that somebody will come forward and tell them where her daughter is, or really any information they have about that night. As Tony is out there and she's plastering these flyers and she's talking to people and looking for her daughter, somebody comes up to the mother and hands her a phone. And on the other line is a woman. And the woman on the other line says, I need to talk to you about this man named Otis. She would go on to say that this man named Otis beat her, sexually assaulted her, and refused to let her leave his home. As this woman is telling Tony her story, Tony's trying to keep it together, but all she can think about is this man did admit to seeing her daughter, and he lied about when he saw her. Tony would go on to say, I broke down because he probably did the same thing to her. You know, that's when it kicks in, your worst nightmare. That was my worst nightmare, hearing that. I'm already dealing with my daughter being missing, and this is not her. But the fact that the last person to see her has done this to somebody else, it kind of broke me down. Do I believe he may have something to do with Keeshae's disappearance? Yes. The police hasn't named him as a person of interest, or say he has, I don't know. I don't know anything but his first name, and I don't even think that's his real name. The strange thing is, when I went to that, because I had her friends take me to that home, and when I questioned him, I was like, do you know Keeshae? And he was like, yeah, I know Keeshae. I know Keeshae always come over here with. And then he named that female friend that I don't care about. Basically, Tony would find out that friend that she didn't care for, that she had a bad feeling about, that was one of Keeshae's best friend, and that best friend had a romantic interest in Otis, which is why the girls were going over there. So on that Wednesday at around 1 or 2 a.m., a detective did call Tony, and she was able to file a missing persons report. But detectives wouldn't get back to her until that following Monday. Tony would say that it would be a full week after Keeshae's disappearance and 5 days after Tony went to the police to report her missing that she received that call from a detective. At this point, of course, Tony is incredibly frustrated, not only with the police department, but people are coming up with her saying that, Keeshae ran away, or maybe she has a boyfriend she's with, and that eventually she'll be home. And Tony is just flabbergasted because she knows this isn't her daughter. Her daughter never leaves without telling her mother. She doesn't ignore her mom's calls or texts. She does everything in her power to stay in contact with her mother. Police would never publicly name a suspect, and it would take them a year before they even announced they believe foul play was suspected in her disappearance. On November 30th, 2017, Richmond police would issue a statement. The statement would say, Keeshae's family understands the scope and magnitude of this investigation. This is not a young lady that just decided to run away or move to another state. It's not her character to not call her family or friends in 14 months when she would reach out to them every day. Detectives have worked diligently in an effort to locate and find Ms. Jacobs. We hope that publicizing our beliefs that she was met with foul play might prompt others to come forward with information that will help solve this case. Toni said that she suspected foul play right from the beginning, and not just because it was her motherly intuition, but she said police had found something when they went looking inside Otis's home for her daughter, and she said it was DNA evidence. Apparently, the police told Toni that they found blood, but it seems like it wasn't enough to pinpoint the fact that Keeshae may have died there. She said that they basically told her that the amount of blood that was there could have come from a struggle or something of the sort. Of course, Toni is telling everybody that'll listen, obviously something happened to my daughter inside that home. And you would think that because this man willingly let police into his home and they saw blood, that it would be enough to get a search warrant. And they didn't do that for some reason. Toni would say, "That's what I kept telling them, and they made me frustrated. I think they just don't want to hear it because once you found her DNA, and then you have this person of interest that did this to somebody else, that would have been the radar, period. And I'm not even in law enforcement. That was a radar for me. Hold on, he did this. He may know something about what happened to my daughter." They said they tried to question him a couple of times, but first time they said right before they got there he was on suicide watch or something. And then a couple of times after, they said he was on medication. He acts like he didn't know who they were or couldn't understand what he was talking about. Of course, people are curious about Keeshae's boyfriend, but Toni doesn't believe he had anything to do with her disappearance. And of course, Keeshae's best friend was also questioned, but not much has come of that. Though Toni does believe that woman knows more than she's letting on to. Unfortunately, 3 months after her daughter disappeared, her son was shot to death. Eventually, the shooter who murdered her son had claimed self-defense, but was found guilty of murder. Unfortunately, he was given a plea deal, and he was only going to serve 5 years in prison for killing her son. Toni would say, "It didn't surprise me because when he murdered my son, and when they finally caught up with him because he ran, the judge gave him house arrest and let him out on bond for murder. Do I have faith in the system? No, I don't. I don't. My heart just unbelievably breaks for this mother. She lost her only children, one of which she still hasn't found. The other who was dead and she has to grieve for. So not only is she just missing one child, she can't even grieve for this child. It seems like the police didn't do a thorough investigation, and she's just left fighting and struggling every day to bring her child home. And that's just completely devastating to anybody, but especially a parent. And Toni was a good mother. She loved both of her children. Her family was incredibly close. And for them to both be snatched away from her is just unimaginable. Toni does have a theory about what happened to her daughter that night. Toni would say, when the guy, Otis, his intention was to keep her like he was going to do with the other girl. He abducted her, held her, you know. When everybody came looking for her, he was like, I gotta give her away, because he ran. He ran and they caught him somewhere up in Maryland. I believe that he gave her to somebody. Toni does believe her daughter was trafficked. Toni would say, I have phone calls where people call me or somebody will be on the phone and don't say anything. Or I have phone calls where people ask to confirm that it's me that they're talking to, and I can hear them talking to somebody in the background, but I don't know who it is. At the end of the day, I can't say she's gone until I have proof she's gone. Toni did have a message for her daughter. She would go on to say, I just want her to know that mommy loves you so, so much and I miss you so much. And I am looking. I am fighting and I ain't giving up until I find you. So tell that person, whoever got you, wherever you are, my mama's coming because I'm coming. I'm coming. My heart not only breaks for Keeshae and what she went through or is going through, but Toni as well. So if you or anybody you know has information on what happened to this girl, please contact the Richmond Police Department. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Instead of giving me suggestions for my next case, I would love for everybody to go and take the information about Keeshae and share it. Look up the missing persons flyer and post it to your social media. Keeshae deserves to be found and Toni deserves answers. I'll see you guys next time.